Hey, John, welcome.
Hey, hey, guy. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good. It's just good catching up with you again, because you have been on the demand for you and your work has just been literally worldwide on multiple different levels, right? I think
Yeah,
your work is like you put your finger right in the center of something, right? And so you're like literally have more invitations than you do cells in your body, it seems like.
not quite that. Not quite that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's been a significant increase in my the things I'm doing, the invitations I've been responding to, the requests for collaboration, the projects. Yeah, it's I mean it's yeah, I'm very grateful for it. I'm not
Yeah.
complaining,
Yeah.
but it is yeah, it's been demanding. It's been quite demanding.
Yeah, I bet I would imagine. I could imagine. Um, and one of the things I've just appreciated about you, and I just get this about you. I think probably most people get this about you is Chris and I were talking yesterday, and he was saying, yeah, it's like John. It's just like it's always been with John. It's just on a much bigger scale, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
the intensity of the questions that you're on is just what you were already up to. It's just amplified a number of times, right? From his
yeah.
perspective, would
Well,
you say?
yeah. Well, his perspective is one of the best perspectives. I watched. He recorded some videos with one of my patrons, Robert Gray, and his observations about me and my work uh, were better than my own self-observations.
Yeah,
I deeply appreciate what Chris has to say,
yeah.
um, and it was humbling. um,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, it sounds like
he's right about that.
I can feel your friendship with them. Just it looked like
Yeah, well,
what you
it's
touched in on there. Hmm.
yeah, he's profound, and um, people are they're sort of, it's a joke. It's not meant to be taken totally seriously, but in this corner of the internet that that Sevilla King has named it. Well, by the way, she's created a Twitter account for it. This little corner of the internet, or something like that. But they say, if I'm Socrates, Chris is Plato, and
Yeah,
he
yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah,
and again, taken in the right way and all pretension and the hyperbole aside, what the intent of the analogy, I get it. I think, and I'm deeply appreciative of it.
yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
and so
absolutely.
as a lot of his observations, I think he's bang on about this. Yes, this is always. I don't feel like the qualitative structure of what I'm doing has changed. I just feel like the scope and intensity of it has
Yeah,
changed. If
yeah.
that's what he means, and I think that's what he means,
Oh,
that's
yeah,
exactly right. And the awakening of the meaning crisis, and then the way COVID accelerated it. I get a lot of comments to the effect that people are watching this series now and they think it was made during COVID, and they discover it was made way before COVID even came,
mm,
and they're shocked, and it's they realize, oh, and what happens is they get this sort of second aha. Oh, COVID is just magnifying things that have been in development for a long time.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. By the way, for you and the listeners, um, you may hear my 6-month-year-old in the background, and I'm going to invite us to I'm going to set the context of the Native American sets and their ceremonies, which is children are articulation of silence. When I
Yeah,
heard that, I was like, that is a great like reframe. Very convenient and true, right? On a certain level. So if we hear silence murmuring in the background. We'll just let it deepen the conversation.
You see, I'm like you. I'm a parent 2 times, and so that's just I wasn't even like, I knew it was there, but it doesn't jangle me at all, right? It's just like, oh yeah, that's just part.
Totally. Right? Totally. Yeah.
Go ahead.
In fact, the conversation that we had about this, Chris and I talked for, I don't know, about 3 hours yesterday, and it was just,
lucky you.
Both of us just had these, it was a profound, like so many big things that had been kind of coming together for me, especially around being a father again at this age, which I'm going to be 50 in August. And the things I'm picking up on that I didn't quite pick up on because I was in such a different place in my life when I had my first child, is just intense, right? Because I had just taught a piece, a Piagetian developmental model that I teach in my courses, and I hadn't taught that for a while, and I just did it a few days ago, and it was so interesting to hear. First of all, it took twice as long as it used to take because there's so much more I'm getting about about the way that we develop, and it's interesting because I think I go to a park down by the water here in Alameda and just sit as much as I can. And one day, and I've been thinking about this ever since, but one day there was this old guy who looked about 120 years old with a cane that looked like he'd had since he was 2, right? And I watched him walk across the park, and I was just really transfixed by him, right? And I didn't quite know exactly what it was what caught my attention exactly. But as I've been thinking about it, there's something about the relationship between him and his cane that was so pronounced, and it's like he's in some sense indwelling in his cane, right? And his cane is indwelling in him, right? There's that oneness going on, right? And
that's
so much so like if you took the cane away from him and you just looked at the cane, you literally like could just almost picture the guy, and vice versa, right?
That sorry, I interrupted you. That image is used independently and convergently by both Merleau-Ponty and Polanyi to talk about indwelling. That's Polanyi's word. I use that when I talk about when I get people to pick up an object and tap on it, and so they can become aware of subsidiary and focal awareness and the different scales of attention. I'm going to be talking to her. I'm reading Esther Meek's book, Making Contact, in which she integrates Merleau-Ponty, Polanyi and Merleau-Ponty and a bit of D.C. Schindler together, and this idea of indwelling. And I've tried to make use of that idea when I try to explain sort of participatory knowing, that you indwell something and allow it to indwell you. So it's union through loving, because that mutually accelerating indwelling is a kind of love, a kind of intimacy. That's what happens to people in circling, of course, right? And
well, it's also like it's precisely what's happening with Teague and my son. And what's interesting about this is so my wife stays at home with him all the time, so they're a unit. Like he literally looks like another limb growing out of her, right? In a certain sense, right? And she had to go to the dentist, and so it was just me and him, which is rare that she's ever gone. And so she like loads me up with the bottles and all the pumped milk and all that kind of stuff, right? And he's going through these. He's got this temperament that's like a Buddha almost all the time. but he was
Yeah.
going through some kind of teething thing. So he would just start crying like crazy out of nowhere,
Yeah. Because
which
he
was
doesn't know what's
unusual
going
for
on.
him. Right.
Yeah.
And there was this moment where I had him up on the couch and he starts screaming. I'm like, uh-oh, all right, get the bottle. So I put him down on the couch and I run and he's screaming. And I go into the kitchen, I grab the bottle, and right before I come out, I hear silence.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, I'm like, whoa. And I go around the corner and he had just flipped. He had developed enough to where he could flip himself over onto the floor. He had never done that before. Right. And I'm of course panicked, and he gets up and he doesn't quite know what's happening. And I pick him up and he was fine, but it scared him. And I think he just had his first break in reality.
Right.
And when it dawned on him, this kind of shock, he started to scream at a level I had never heard before.
Yeah.
And he looked right into my eyes for about, I'd say, a good 20 minutes. He would scream and like look right in my eyes. And then he'd like lose contact for a second, and then he'd look around and he'd look right in my eyes. And I sit down with him and I give him the bottle, and he starts sucking on the bottle, right, while screaming at the same time and spitting out the bottle, but he won't lose contact with my eyes. And we're doing this thing. And it was really interesting because at a certain point he calmed down enough, right, to where he was just sucking with these little iterations of little eruptions, right? And he'd start to fall asleep, and he'd wake up again, and then he'd contact me again, right? This back and forth until finally he fell in. It's like the deepest sleep I'd ever seen in him.
Yeah.
And I sat there in this, because we were alone. I just had this. He was sleeping, and it was completely silent. And I'm sitting here after this whole experience, and I had such a profound feeling of, I don't know how to put it. It's something like the eidos, the gathers of the family, right? Right, something like that. The thing that that gathers all the aspects of everything that we do as a family that I'm usually lost in dealing with, right? In that moment of silence with him, right, I watched that kind of break for him for a moment and then come back together. And where he found himself was right here. And I knew to look him in the eye, and he knew to look me in the eye. And there was this interesting dynamic. And because we could just sit there for a while afterwards, I literally felt like almost like the eidos of the family that gathered everything together. I felt like it glistened or something. I could almost see it, right? And it's this kind of feeling of very much like the cane and the old man, right? There was him in literally indwelling himself into me and me in him, right? It's like it broke, and I saw the whole thing kind of reorganize in real time. And then that experience just kind of vibrated for a moment. And I felt this sense in which I felt what we both were participating in that was much bigger than both of us, right? Because it wasn't like I had in my mind, when he falls down, like make sure and look him right in the eyes. And all of this happened as a kind of tacit knowing, right? But in this way where I felt the organizing principle of all that just hover in the air and sitting with it. And it was in it, and I felt as if it was the through, as you talk about it, like the through line of not just all of the moments of being a family with him since he was born, but also all the other families that are like that all the way back, right? You could just
Right,
feel this kind of
right,
through
yeah.
line of this, the way that we gather and come together.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, I think the comparison to the cane is apt. I use that as an example of the transparency opacity shifting.
Yeah,
The old man or the blind person is feeling through the cane. They don't feel the cane. They
yeah,
feel through it. But at times, especially if there's a break, if something goes wrong, then
yeah,
they step back and look at the cane, or like I do with my glasses, you step back and look at it
yeah,
rather than looking through it. And
totally.
so that disruption,
Yeah,
normally I think you're looking through all of
exactly.
that. And then the disruption means you step back and you're looking at it, and then you get the sense of all of this machinery at work, um, at so many different levels of our psyche and between our brains and our bodies and between you and another person, and the way evolution and culture and history have all shaped them, and all of
Yeah,
that machinery just comes in. Yeah, you become aware of it. Yeah,
yeah,
those moments are very, very powerful.
yeah.
And I hadn't directly made that connection, and I'm sort of savoring it right now.
Mhm.
Because that's so apropos to Dialogos and to
Yeah,
eidetic adduction. But no, but the idea of
yeah,
the transparency opacity shift that Polanyi talks about, and when it discloses the organizing principles, the eidos of things, that's very good. Like, like,
do it right now,
yeah.
right?
Well, but yeah, but that's it. Like there were the pieces we're talking about were in my mind, and not just casually. I've talked about them in depth. But what you just did, yeah. But notice how there's a transparency opacity shifting
Yeah,
that's going on, and we have talked about something similar. We talked about the theoria moves, but
totally.
yeah, there's something going on there. What a
Mhm.
transparency opacity shift is the ability to disclose the underlying organizing principles that give us a participatory sense of an eidos,
Mm.
of the through line of a structuring patterning. Yeah, that's really good. I'm gonna have to reflect on that, but
Yeah,
that's a really, really powerful connection. That's why the mindfulness is such an important thing, that we
yeah,
get people to practice the scaling down in meditation and the scaling up in contemplation before they do any of the other practices. So
yeah.
yes, we've got to bring that out a bit more in the dialectic into Dialogo. That's very good.
Well,
That's
there's
very
one of the
good.
things. There's one of the things.
Because that's the point of this. So one thing.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the
please.
Socratic. The Socratic aporia is like when Teague fell off the couch.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
Socratic aporia tries to trigger
yeah.
a transparency opacity shift. And it's the shift that discloses
Ah,
the eidos.
ah,
Yes.
yes, yes.
Yes.
Because there is that sense in which, yeah, there's that sense that in when it's like philosophical aporia or Socratic
Yeah.
aporia, it, it's and this is the big thing that I think in Dialogos, that the context of Dialogos um, helps us see that limitation, right? The lack of knowing, we could say, into
Yeah.
the sight of moreness, right? Of like what Kant did, which where he just was like, the thing in itself, and you can never reach it, and there's that
Yeah.
separation.
Yeah.
There's a sense with Dialogos where that line actually accounts for the sense of what you don't know in that moment, in some sense, is the way that the moreness is present, the beyond. I think you talk about it as the instead of the thing in itself that you can't contact, it's the thing beyond itself, that thing that
Yes.
always exceeds, and it's
Yeah.
in contact with that, right?
So two things about that, right? One is, right, like, and this is from the work I'm doing after Socrates. So Nicholas of Cusa, who also wrote Dialogues, by the way, right, and learned ignorance, and his learned ignorance is the culmination of the Socratic. I know that I don't know,
Yeah,
right, and this whole, and that it's in that state where you get the disclosure, because it's not a privation. It's like you said, it's a moreness. And then Merleau-Ponty's point that the body is inherently the thing beyond itself, because you don't have a body, you are a body, and yet your body is a body amongst the other bodies in the world. The body is always a thing beyond itself, because it allows you to be it allows you to directly participate in the way everything is, or most things are embodied in the world. And yet, right, it's also something that you are. And so the body is inherently the thing beyond itself. And that's why the embodiment aspect of Dialogos is so crucial, because like you, and this is Harman too, in objective oriented ontology, right? Object oriented ontology, I should say. We talks about how you actually, it's your own moreness within yourself, the way you're a thing beyond yourself, that allows you to grok how the object as a thing beyond itself and beyond you, right?
Yeah.
Yes, very much. All of that. But what I'm getting,
yes,
and what's exciting to me is and this is what I'm doing quite a bit of work on, right? You know, I talked about the rovers on Mars again yesterday. I'm trying to get this into practice. What does it mean to take these notes? And what you just did a minute ago, it's like, I'm even thinking we should modify the dialectic into Dialogos practice, and that when the person falls silent, the proposer, after there's acknowledgement, and the interlocutor gets agreement that they've been understood.
Yeah.
And they should sit in silence. Everybody should sit in silence for a bit. Yeah. They should struggle with the opening that's been created by the proposer and the aporia, the horizon that they're on, and really try to do the transparency to opacity shift. Step back into a mindfulness practice and see what is trying to emerge, what is trying to come forward.
Yeah.
And then the next proposer would propose what they're going to say. I think we should introduce a moment of operatic mindfulness.
Just like I had with Teague.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the two people and everybody just stays in contact, and everybody's trying to sense before. Let's make a space for the silence before we speak. Let's feel the aporia. Let's feel where we're struggling. Let's feel what's trying to give birth. We're going to be midwives. Yeah. I think we should modify the dialectic into Dialogos to have a moment in there of operatic silence where people are encouraged to do a transparency to opacity shift.
Yes. And catch that moment and savor it.
Exactly. Deep savoring.
Yeah.
Deep savoring. Yeah. Yes.
And in some sense, kind of in some way, wed or re-wed, or actually realize our weddedness to, in some sense, the unknown as such, right? Like the sense of what kind of silence is it? And start to articulate quality of not knowing. Yeah.
I want people to savor the mute musicality of that. That's what I want people to do.
Yeah. Yes.
And then another thing, not for this, I think we can incorporate that into the upcoming workshop. But I was talking to Rick Petty, and where they do what's called Socratic dialogue with a big D. And I think we should think about also putting that, because the dialectic into Dialogos is apophatic, right? Right. And then this one, it's trying to induce wonder. What they do in Socratic dialogue is they'll pose a question, and each one will give an answer. Like there'll be a circle, and then everybody. And what you have to do, let me be really careful. So the topic's honesty. So you have to say a moment in your life where you felt you most were honest, and what was disclosed to you about honesty. And then everybody goes around and says that, and then they all sort of vote on which episode most is exemplary of honesty.
And then
totally. And then so that one person becomes the person that's questioned, and then everybody else is allowed to ask probative clarification questions about that, and they're trying to work out like what honesty is, and then everybody goes around and takes that definition back into their own moment and tries to discover in that moment something that they hadn't seen before because of the collective definition.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Yeah, it is. That's almost like the photographic negative of.
That's what I said when I was talking to Rick. I said,
Yeah,
dialectic into dialogos is apophatic. That's the cataphatic. And what we should do is have people practice both.
yeah. God, we should do a week-long course of this.
Yes. Yeah. Very much. Very much.
Yeah.
Very
To
much.
do all of this. It's interesting, like, what another thing, and this ties in here and in some way, and I talked a lot, and when I talked with Chris about it, it just expanded into this whole other thing, right?
Right.
But this way in which there was something revealed in the way in which Teague, he's 6 months old, right? He barely even knows that these shapes in front of him has anything to do with him, right?
Yeah.
But he had this break, this shock of the realization of separation or something like that. And then he knew where to look to find himself.
Of course.
And it was
Yeah.
here. Like, and I think that reveals something about the way that we are at perhaps the deepest level evident to ourselves, with the way that we are given to ourselves. In that,
It's through other people. It's through other people.
Oh, totally. I am given to myself as the beloved, right? Like everything.
Yeah. Kids can't introspect until they're about 4 or 5 years of age.
Totally. And
They-
so literally, that look
Yeah.
was this direct peek at where he was, right? Where
Yeah.
yes.
It's in the symposium, right?
Yes.
The other person's eyes are the mirrors by which you see yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Totally. And in that sense, and what's wild is when you think about it, what's peculiar about it is that way of being evident phenomenologically evident to ourselves, right, is the self that I have it's unlike almost everything else that I deal with in the world, where everything else is pretty much, it presents itself from itself, right? It's evident from its own self-presentation, from its own ground. But when I look at me, I'm not presented from my self-evidence from my own ground. I am given over as this intersubjective
Totally.
self that's not a self-presentation, right?
Yep. Chris and I are going to get into that. In fact, I just got it today. Philosophical Fragments and Johannes Climacus by Kierkegaard, because we're working on the series.
I just bought that yesterday. Yesterday, that very book.
Yeah. Well, there you go, because Chris and I we're preparing the video series on Socrates and Kierkegaard. And so I'm going through, because the Philosophical Fragments is written under the pseudonym of Johannes Climacus. And then, so that's this. And then Kierkegaard wrote a sort of a biography of him, which is really interesting. Because we're preparing the Socrates and Kierkegaard video series.
Right.
And exactly that notion that you're talking about, and even, climate. I've even been reading the actual John Climacus, the guy who wrote the Ladder. What is it? The Ladder of Ascent, where he was a monk. And you can see why Kierkegaard picked him. Like, it's deliberate. Because Kierkegaard is really wrestling with exactly this issue. So for example, John Climacus is all about leaving the world and going into solitude and being by yourself. And you can see Kierkegaard is, like, of course, deeply identifying with this and attracted to this. But Kierkegaard also knows, right, how much, right, our self is the self is a relation to itself and blah, blah, all that
Yeah.
stuff about that we're talking
Yeah.
about here. And that's why he writes like he writes under pseudonyms, and he writes almost in dialogical form. And like it's
Yeah, you need,
it's so
you need
familiar.
about four more
It's so
hands.
familiar.
Pour all the insight.
Exactly. It's so familiar to us.
That's the
Familiar
key.
to us and familiar that you just but you don't realize
Family,
that.
familiar.
Yes, exactly. You don't exactly. Even the using the word familiar relies on the fact that you have been within a family.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
Oh, there's something that's familiar to me. Well, that is because of the way you are and you, right? And this is part of Kierkegaard's thing, right? And you extend that to the world in a way you don't even realize. Yeah, right. All of that.
This is what we were talking about. Yes, this is what we're talking. Chris and I were talking about it in terms of this model that I use to kind of describe development. It's a kind of a Piaget-esque kind of model that goes from, we could say, dependency to independence to interdependence, or in Wilber terminology, like the pre-rational, the rational, the transrational, or dependency, agency, communion. And talking about these leaps that you make, right, when you develop, when it goes well, right, and you think about it, this connection between vulnerability and ability is so profound when you think about this, because
there's just more synchronicity. Because John Rusin talked about what does it mean to become an adult, and how is that different in the very way we experience time.
Yeah.
And he was talking about adulthood as this ability to basically to respond to reality. And he was talking about again, he took something very familiar, right? And he was saying, what does it mean to become an adult?
Yeah.
Like we use this word maturity,
yeah.
and we have biological markers for it, but and legal markers. But no, what are the existential markers?
Right.
He said, think about Teague takes his first step because reality basically hits him when he falls, right? And he realizes that there is something beyond him that is nevertheless can reach to the very depths of him. It's simultaneously transcendent to him and immanent to him. Yeah. And he talked about adulthood as a growing responsiveness and responsibility to this.
Yes. And if we think about it, this is what Chris took this to a whole other level, which opened up a whole. I needed like 10 more nervous systems to be able to kind of grok what we were talking about, right? To contain it. But there was this sense where we were talking about this, where the child, because the child is literally every human infant, when you look at an infant, what you're looking at is literally the most vulnerable part of the cosmos, right? There's they're like comparatively of any other mammal, probably any other organism in this way, you're literally seeing the most helpless and vulnerable and exposed creature in the world.
Yes.
Therefore, it's a unique kind of dependency that we start off in, where it's the parents kind of, in some sense, seal off the outside world and create the second, right? The sense of the holding environment. And as the child develops, right, there's that quality of as it develops, and it can start to begin to reach out a bit. Then if the parents are attuned, they'll let a little bit of the world come in, right?
Yes, exactly.
And then you get that mutual reciprocal shaping, right? And a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And independence would be something like, when you internalize, in some sense, the responsiveness and the security that comes from that responsiveness, right? in those parental relations, when that becomes something internalized, then you jump up into independence or agency.
I want to complexify.
Yeah.
I want to complexify that. Because John Rusin was talking about this, and he said, you know, that adults are the buffers for he called them the buffer zone for the children, like, you know, where you're buffering. Right. And it's like, oh, that's a great metaphor. And then I proposed something. I said, yeah, but is it really the case that we leave that behind, or do we do something else? Right? Because I said what COVID revealed is that what people do is they take that and they create a bigger buffer zone, and that's called home. And then what we do is we have layers of this and what COVID did was strip a lot of that away, and people felt very vulnerable, and they even moved often dangerously, into more infantile modes of reacting to the world and responding to the world.
Really well.
So I think it's simultaneous, which I think is really, we start to internalize that. But we also start to externalize our capacity for familiarizing the world. And now we can really play on that language. So, you know, what we do is we create bigger buffer zones. Think about how home is basically, a transformer in almost the electrical grid sense. Because the world is, you step down the power of the world into more predictability and more familiarity. But then when you're ready, you can, because you think about how those two moments, think about Luke Skywalker leaving home, and that's a second growing up, I'm seeing it more and more like niche construction rather than just going out. Like I'm replacing the hero's journey metaphor with the niche construction metaphor. That what we do is we start to internalize the environment. We let it shape us. We're responsive to reality, but we also shape the environment, and so they become mutually. And I think what allows us to do that looping is the fact that we're inherently intersubjective.
And in that sense, and this is what in my conversation with Russin John Russin was, where he said, you know, we never get rid of that exposure. In fact, that's in some sense, it's that tacit understanding, right? And this is probably what Heidegger would refer to as death, right? This sense of mortality. Exposure, right, is constantly in the background. It's always there. So in some sense, it's not that we become invulnerable. It's that we can begin to become more profoundly permeable and transparent, right, to the world, and the world to us, right, and greater deal. This is what Chris said, right, is like when we went from independence, right, from dependence to independence. Chris is like, and this is where then the parents leave. And then it goes to God, right? Traditionally, right? That's the sense of like where it's like that you never lose the dependency. And then I was thinking about, well, and I would imagine at the most profound level, it's like when it's God, and then it's revealed that God, in some sense, was the thing that I was dependent on the whole time, that I didn't realize, right? That that was already the case. And then in some sense, the parents were enacting this deep kind of archetypal eidetic structure of the world, right? In such a sense that, and then it comes back down. But this is what's interesting is once you do that, like agency almost right away goes to communion, right? Because the moment that you have genuine agency, right? And that there's a felt sense of that I can open up to the world because that there's something that isn't at stake, right? Such that I can actually open up to it because there's a certain amount of security, right, within the way I organize in my world, right? So I can open up to the world fully. I can open up to being hurt. I can open up to the unknown. I can open up to all these like the wonder of things, because there's some sense in which I understand that I can relate to whatever comes up, and that there's something deeply essential that isn't at stake in the matter, right?
So I would want to put that, okay, I have like three resonances with it.
Yeah.
The first is one of the things, and this is again a Kierkegaardian, the Socratic point, one of the things religion should do is take that tacit familiarization of the world and get you to step back and look at it rather than look through it. That's aporia. That's when you realize this, as opposed to thinking it is just the way things are. Like you come to the horizon, you come to the horizon of horror, you come to the horizon point between horror and home, right? And that's where religion should place you, so that you can, instead of seeing through, like people use the cocoon metaphor, instead of right, you actually get a tear, right? What I'm trying to get at is aporia makes you step back and realize the vulnerability of the way you've homed things, the way that you have made things familiar. And religion is designed, when it works, to do exactly that. And so I was thinking again about what you said, and I was thinking about Ederstadt's book on how the West really lost God. We've lost extended family. See, but I see it with my partner, because they've maintained the extended family. So there's parents, but then there's the grandparents. And the grandparents are a constant daily presence. And so what you get for the child, oh yes, there's the God figure of the parent, but there's the God beyond the gods, right? And you get the sense of the levels and the layering, and and so what she points out is, as we move to nuclear families and individuals living alone, people have lost the sense of God because of that. And so that's also something that we need to be thinking about, like trying to, that's what I'm trying to get with when you do the four. I try to get that with the four-step movement of the dialectic. So one person proposes, and then another person sort of transcends them, but then they're transcended, and then they're transcended, so that people get that apoplectic sense, right? And that's
precisely that sense that the logos was the thing that was operating the whole time, and you find yourself in it, realizing it had already been the case. And there's that fortitude, right? There's that fortitude. Yes.
It's always beneath you and beyond you.
Yes.
Like the parent and then the grandparent, and like the way you felt the evolutionary line running through you when you were eye locked. Then the other thing is, I was thinking about what you just said. There is a certain kind of security, but then we're also the beings whose being is in question. I think the ability to enter into aporia is to disclose something fundamental. And for me, I'm really interested in what is it as allows people to be in the question without being consumed by the question, right? Because let's be honest, this is a Kierkegaardian point. People try to avoid, and this is Heidegger's point in authenticity, people try to avoid the fact that their being is questioned. They don't want the transparency, opacity shift, to see the framework, right? To see the vulnerability of the framework. They don't want to see, COVID forced that on a lot of people. And like I said, a lot of people have responded like in ways that indicate they were traumatized by this disclosure. And so, like, this is more of a question, like, yes, there's a certain amount of security, but also we are trying to get people to realize, like, that like, when you realize that, like, you want to be courageous and there's something in you that's being called by courage, but you don't really get courage, and it's not securely in your conceptual grasp. This is a Socratic moment. That's a moment where your being comes into question, because who are you? Who are you when you think you're being heroic or etc. Like, what did, like, and so for me, I'm trying to get I'm trying to get, what is it we do? What is it we do that allows people? This is why I want to do the aporia now in the dialectic and the dialogos, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
What is it that allows people? Like, what do people do when they're on that horizon that allows them to be in the question without being consumed by it? Do you understand what I'm trying to get to?
So I understand. So I can get the sense of, and the being consumed by it, paint the picture of what would be being consumed by the question.
The bottom drops out. The realization the ground is groundless, right? Like this is, what's been going on in the conversations with, with Daniel and Johannes, right? Even in the Neoplatonic Christian, that it's, you are properly that place of tonos, tension, right? On the horizon, the tension between home and horror, right? That, that's the place of learned ignorance.
Yeah. And that's precisely the line that we want to be on in Dialogos. That's in some sense, that's the practice. In some sense, it's to tolerate that aporia in a way,
the tension of the aporia.
Yes,
exactly.
Right.
To be consumed.
Yes. Thus, all of the, you could say, the procedural knowing that has to be there in the beginning, right? Because it's a way of holding you in that tension, right? As it starts to open up, you can start to have a right relationship with it.
Exactly. And that's how you have the right relationship to being, or to courage, or to wisdom. Because what do I mean by being consumed by the question is, you either drop back into home, and you pretend to have an answer, or you are sucked into horror, and you think that there is no intelligibility, there's no logos at all. So, right. That's like, this is like in AI, we're like the relevance problem. Relevance is neither algorithmic nor arbitrary. You can't completely assimilate it to your algorithms, that's homing it, but it's not just arbitrary. It's in between those, and you have to dwell in between those.
Here's, I think, the difference. Here's, I think, one of the difference. I don't know if it's the deepest difference, but I think it has to do with a voluntarily turning towards it. I think when you're defended against it, or there's a sense that I can't survive it, right? There's a sense where I don't want it. I'm exposed versus being vulnerable, right? That's the difference, right? And I would imagine family systems talks about the intimacy as a function of your ability to tolerate anxiety, right?
Very much.
And it's
otherness.
And especially and they talk about it in terms of the paradox of being a human being is simultaneously, in other words, it's not half the drive to be secure and belong, and the other half for autonomy. It's 100% at every dimension, right? That you have a drive to be autonomous and to belong. That they're both true, and that moments of intimacy are the moments where it looks like what the risk is, if I say the thing that's really true for me, I may lose you, right? But if I don't say it, I'll lose myself. And there's that. So if you can't tolerate that anxiety and you're defended against it and you dominate instead, they say like the three ways of not tolerating the anxiety, in other words, moving away from intimacy, is one is you dominate, you just take charge and control everything, or you submit, and I'll just do it whatever you want to do, or I'll just dissociate and float on the ceiling, which is my favorite. Or and here's the thing about this, and it's in moments of intimacy, it's something that you choose to turn towards and say, right? Or
But why? But why do you choose? And why
Yeah.
does the choosing matter? That's what's code.
That's, I think I would imagine, because it would have to be that there's something that I don't yet understand that is calling me, that's beyond what I know, right? That there's some sense, there's something beyond the horizon that draws me towards the thing I'm most scared of, right? What do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, I mean, there's two ways in which I wanted to answer that question. What came to mind first was not the question you just asked me, which is maybe the better question. I was thinking, what do people need to do to be ready for that? There's a readiness for the choice, and I think it's something like, I'm going to pun a little bit here: familiarity with wonder, with actually wondering in the sense of pondering. This is why I think this is what's driving our project. This understanding that the intimacy that's cultivated in circling has to be put into the service of a deeper wondering.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Yes. Right. And so I think what part of what we're doing, right, and we've talked about this before, the cultivation of philia that can then be turned towards Sophia. They get the connectedness, and then they get the practice on the wondering with the philosophical fellowship, and then they're ready for the turning.
Yeah.
So, but then the what calls us.
Yeah.
What calls us is, I think, something like, I think, and I talked about this yesterday, I talked about, why do the scientists do all this stuff? Why don't they just do the theory? Like, why do they do that? No, they first have to get the seeing, the perspectival knowing, and the participatory knowing. And that's because I think that's an argument for the dependency relationship.
Yeah.
The propositional knowledge depends on the skills. This is the way I was saying it. The layer below is the space for the transformation of the layer above. So I have propositional knowing. Where do I go to transform my propositions and move between them? Well, those are my skills.
Yeah.
The procedural level is the space for the transformation of the propositional. Where do I go when I want to acquire or coordinate new skills? I drop into my situational awareness, my perspectival knowing. Where do I go when I want to coordinate these different things together, right? These different states of mind, these different episodes. I drop to participatory knowing. I drop to the self and the participatory knowing. And then where do I go when I try to coordinate all the participants? There's no deeper knowing than that. This is where you're touching paradoxical dwelling as opposed to any kind of knowing, right? And this is where learned ignorance takes you. It takes you to something you can't know, because it's ultimately about the paradox, right? That horizon point.
Yes. And this is like putting it in terms, if we use this as an analogy, like intimacy with another human being. Intimacy is a lot of things. Moments of intimacy is a lot of things, but one thing it isn't is safe, right? However, when you cross that threshold with somebody, you take the risk, right? And you enter into, because once you do that, you open into what you don't know that you didn't know, right?
Yes.
So all of your fears, this is what's transformative about it. This is why it's in some sense usually leads to some kind of deep transcendence in a big way, is because all of the fears that I have the moment before I cross the line, right? By crossing the line, I become someone different in some regard, right? I let go of something, and it's usually the sense of like, my worst fear ends up not being relevant about what opens up as that. So it's like I say, if there's a desire that I'm afraid to say, because I'm afraid that the other person can be threatened and I'll be shut out or whatever it is, like, and then I say it and I open myself, right? Voluntarily open myself to that vulnerability of whatever happens. Usually things start to happen where that reveals something in the other person that has me realize that that's not actually what I wanted. We have a conversation, has me realize the real want was this, and I hadn't realized it, right?
I think that's exactly right. I mean,
But I think it's like
yeah,
what's interesting is that when you experience that with another person, that creates a genuine sense of safety in the relation as a result of that. But here's the thing that you start to have faith in. You
yes,
start to have faith in that, like you start to have faith in, if I open up in that level, I will transform. There's something beyond what I could know. I become secure in some sense, the wonder. That's the ground. It's not certainty. It's precisely beyond certainty. It's yes.
Yeah, it's faithfulness rather than what we commonly call faith. I totally agree with that. And I was going to say, that's Teague looking at you.
Yeah.
Because, right?
Yeah. I don't know if I totally know what you mean, but my goosebumps. My goosebumps.
Yeah. So, right? Your faithfulness is based on not a propositional, but an actual encounter with the presence and the receptivity for agape. Teague has a tremendous power. He can, and the verb here is inadequate, but he can receive agape.
Yeah.
Right? That's what turns him to your eyes.
Yeah.
He can receive agape. He's a receiver. That's no guarantee he'll get it from you.
Yeah.
But there's a receiver, right? And the degree to which we have become persons is because we have been, right, entrusted to agape in a profound way. Right? That's what I meant when he turns. What he turns is, right, the power to receive agape is turning, and there is the power of agape, and they are meeting each other in a profound way. And so we get to I think what we do, you said you get to a place where you realize, right, the possibilities of these two powers. Like there's no guarantee. You may not have ever met anybody like Brianne, right?
Yeah.
Right? I may not have met who I'm with, right?
Yeah.
Right? But there is that, right? But there is always the promise, because these two things really do exist, the power to receive and the power to give agape. And they are always there. And so when you turn to each other, right? I'm thinking of it almost like the positive and negative, of magnets. These two powers they orient, and then they fit together. They belong together in a powerful way. And I think when you like in a romantic relationship, when the eros and the philia, they can entrust you to that agape. And what you do is you trust in yourself that you have the power to receive agape, or else you wouldn't be there. You couldn't be there as a person.
Yeah.
And you entrust that the other person you're with is capable of giving it.
Yeah.
Right. And the same for them. And then you're touching the very fundaments of how we come to personhood.
Yeah.
And the degree to which we trust in the power, this is going to sound like a Hallmark card, but the degree to which we trust in the power of personhood is the degree to which we can be faithful in that situation of high risk.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
That's what I meant when.
In fact, you become attracted to it. You become attracted.
You're drawn to it.
And more skilled, simultaneously attracted to it and more skilled at being attracted to it. It becomes the telos in some sense, right?
Exactly. Think about what your fear is about. Your fear is a threat to your personhood, but in the moment that we're talking about, you can drop to the level of the power that constitutes personhood. And that's how you can respond.
Yes.
So you can say, well, I may lose this and this, but as long as I'm in agape, I won't lose personhood.
Yes. It's interesting. It's like I'm getting the sense that there's a realization of a kind of secure attachment to that which I am in wonder about, like,
Yes.
in some sense. And what you're saying too about this way, and where like Teague turned towards, because his ability to receive, right,
Yes.
agapic love,
Yes.
and that my ability or lack of ability to really turn towards him with agapic love
Yes.
is in some sense the realization of all of, like, for me, the realization of all those moments of exposure and vulnerability that then, and here's Rilke, right, made the world ripen in my gaze,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's a gaze it's interesting. It's a gaze that, it's not like a gaze. It doesn't feel like this to me. It doesn't feel like a gaze that I have and I'm pointing it out to the world, right? like a
Yeah.
sci-fi flick or something. It feels like a gaze that's continually revealed, that's always already been there, right? It's
Yes.
a gaze
Very
that you
much.
participate in, right?
Yeah.
And that's the sense. I think that's really, in some sense, it's oh god, this is really interesting. So in some sense, it's 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 the maturing and the ripening of, well, here it is, not myself as an object, right, but
Mhm.
more like this, the realization of the source of myself as the clearing, right, for a world to gather and become what it is. It's like
Yes.
this, that's the, see, this is one of the things about what's been so interesting to me about watching circling develop over the years, is that the way to really get into the practice, that people kind of get into the practice, is by learning how to lead it. That's, it's strange. It's like, imagine going to, if you looked at it in terms of you go to a therapist, and like the goal of the therapist was to get you to want to be a therapist and then to become a therapist. That would be growing in some sense.
Yeah.
In
That's
circling,
always.
it's on its own, it's just been like that, where people, I mean, some people go and get circled and participate that way, but the people who really like take it on as take it on as, let's say, like a spiritual practice, how they do it is by learning how to be the one who's facilitating it, which I think,
Socratic.
yeah,
This is
yeah,
Socratic. It's
yeah.
something. This is what I've always put in my pedagogy. The best way to teach is to learn, and the best way to learn is to teach.
So this one is just pause for a second. So like, I kind of felt in this moment, I feel in the presence of, I think it's aporia, the very
Yeah.
thing that you're talking about, like that, if we just pause for a second and kind of feel what has just disclosed itself for a moment, because I could just feel, I just felt right in this moment, a silence come in. Just want to listen, let's listen to it for a second. For me, the word weaving
Mhm.
comes in, like a sense of something has just been gathering and weaving.
For me, I was resonating with what I was talking about when I was talking about yesterday about the distinction between the imaginary and the imaginal. And the imaginal is when you're not looking at an image in your mind, you're looking through an image into the world,
Yeah.
so that you can augment. It's imagination for the sake of perception, not imagination in place of perception, but
Yeah.
imagination that enhances perception, and that's what we're doing here. We're throwing out these images in order not to look at them, but to look through them. And so I was getting in an image of a loop, and the loop was imaginal for me, right? It's helping. I'm enacting this loop, and I'm not picturing a loop in my mind, right? I'm getting this from you and I, and so I'm enacting it with gesture, and that's a lot. It's the whole point of it is to enhance my perception of something, not to look at the image, but to look through it. That's what I was getting. Maybe that's like, maybe you're even doing that with the weaving. The weaving is imaginal.
Yeah, there's a quality of, I oftentimes think about the logos, the dynamic of the logos, right? Of being a kind of weaving, a gathering, right? Context, textile, right? And I've imagined it in some sense of imagining, like, okay, from the perspective of the weaving itself, there's like weaving it together, but it's all the dynamic of bringing together. But at some point, the weaving itself becomes complex enough to where it part of it kind of looks back for a second, and it sees that it hadn't seen the pattern that the weaving had been created, but in seeing that alters the weaving, and then a new shape start, and then there's a new shape that gets woven in as a function of that weaving.
Okay, but this, first of all, I want to, like, this is a sidestep. Again, feeding back into, like, for the workshop, we need to put more emphasis on this. Like, we've given this instruction, but I think we need to, like, we got to get people to pay attention to the showing up of the imaginal in gesture and in metaphor. And people, instead of it being transparent, do the transparency, opacity shift, step back, look at the gestures more, look at the metaphors, but look at the imaginal, look at the, right, step back and get that and get involved with that. We put that into the instruction for doing the practice, but we've got to do more and get people, like, really sensitive, right, to the showing up of the imaginal, and really doing that, clearing that space for it, and say, step back and look at what we're doing. Look at what we're doing with our hands. Look at what you were doing. You were doing weaving, and you're saying weaving, and then you're noticing the connection between context and textile, and you did this, and then you did this, and you did this, right? And it's like, stop and savor that a lot more. Just be with it before, like, let it ripen before you go on to the next point. Let it ripen without analysis for a bit. Just savor it and ripen, and then return to try to the propositional level. Like, we need to get people more sensitive to the presencing of the imaginal when they are confronting aporia.
And precisely, and what you're saying is not the imaginal like an instruction that we use the imaginal, but the imaginal that's actually taking place, right?
Exactly.
Witnessing the imaginal itself already underneath and organizing what is happening when we're not even thinking about the imaginal, but we're thinking through it,
right,
with it.
The imaginal is when we are turning, like Teague, we're turning our gaze and we're trying to receive the attunement, right? That's what the imaginal is doing. It's trying to augment our gaze. We're sweeping our gaze around, and we're trying to, there, right?
Oh, interesting. So this is, okay. So I just take a deep breath, because that just, something came together for me. This meditation retreat that I taught a few weeks ago, it was the first time that I explicitly taught meditation, right? As it was a 7-day silent meditation retreat. And this sense of what teaching has had me reveal over the years is the musicality
Yes.
of things. That there's a way in which teaching, I really get the sense of there's like a maestro conducting an orchestra,
Yes.
right? That he's not controlling the orchestra. He's not playing one of the instruments.
He's conducing. He's conducing.
Yeah.
That's the name.
Yes.
He's a conducing.
Yes. Yes. And there's something about teaching that I would imagine that it is that the context of the course, right, makes the feedback loops close enough in that you can hear the music a lot more.
Yes.
And so, but then what was great about it though is I would get this sense of conducting, right, when I was teaching, but then we'd all meditate, and then I'd sit for an hour and a half. And then I got this sense of it was like there was still conducting happening while I was meditating, but it was different. It was more like the way electricity conducts through a wire, right? And this back and forth of being a wire, right, and being a maestro, a wire and a maestro, a wire and a maestro, right, was it started to this dialectic in the background started to like what is the connection between the two? How are they connected? I could feel how they were, but some part of me was like watching this dialectic happen. And then we went, because we were right by the ocean in Washington. Then it was warm enough to go out and sit and watch the ocean. We did like a 3-hour sit where the object of the meditation was the ocean.
Right.
And it was
actually a contemplative exercise.
Yeah. Yes. And I don't know if I can put it into words. Maybe you can help me put it into words. But I felt the deeper root that connected those two. I felt like the ocean told me, right?
Yeah.
There was something about the ocean, and it was something like, because it felt like the ocean was doing both, right? In some sense, there is a music going on there's a rhythm, right? There's a cadence, there's a conducting like a maestro, there's a musicality to it, but there's also this straight in transmission thing animating it. And in some sense, they're both happening so clearly transparent to each other, right? And showing up for each other. And I just had a felt sense of like whatever it was, this conducting in it as a wire and conducting as a maestro completely joined in that moment. I'm just getting this sense of like what we're talking about, that there's
like that.
Yeah. That and I think maybe with what I love about the practice that we're going to be doing in the course, right? The dialectic into Dialogos is I think part of what it's getting at is that moment of when it shifts from dialectic to Dialogos is that moment, right, where it shifts from in some sense, we become like a copper wire, right?
Yes.
In some sense, we merge with the logos, and then the musicality, right? That something else is doing the conducting, but we're from the kind of the standpoint of the electricity, and we're watching it weave, and we're saying things that we didn't even have any idea. We didn't know we knew that, and all of this starts to happen, right? And this back and forth of those two things. That's what that's part of what I'm present to here.
Yeah, for me, that's the theurgia of it. This is the Neoplatonic element. They were often accused of that was sorcery or something. But these were the ritual practices that were you conduct them, but the point is you conduct them so that you are conducively open to the gods in a powerful way, and so that so Iamblichus took all of the philosophical and sort of contemplative aspects from Plotinus, and he added in these ritual practices where he was, and he was at great pains to try and describe it as exactly that, where what you're doing is like you're doing things, but you move into a state of sort of learned ignorance where you conduct yourself into this place that you then become a conductor, right? Like you're saying, you flip and because what they were trying to cultivate was, and this goes back to Teague, the conduction is the musical musical conductor is trying to activate and appreciate and celebrate and thereby cultivate that original capacity for deep receptivity. So think about how music, when it's properly appreciated, can reach deep into your capacity to receive, emergent intelligibility, and how it's imaginal. How you're not looking, you're looking. It's augmenting your ability to perceive the situation, to perceive reality.
Yes. And there's something about, it's interesting because if you think about, this is, I think, analogous to some of the insights that happen. So if I take a song, right, and I slow it down, right, in a certain sense, if I slow it down, you can still hear it as a song, but at some point, if you slow it down enough, there'll be some point where you can't, the beats and the rhythm and the melody
goes outside working memory capacity. So you lose the gestalt.
So you lose the music. So in some sense, I think that there's probably something going on in Dialogos to where our relationship to time, right?
Yes, right.
Expands or we could think about it, is it contracts or brings, but there's something going on that moment where it gets close enough where you can hear the melody. And in the sense was on some level before that, you'd hear say the bass line, right? It happens once every 4 years, right? Or whatever. And you have this whole relationship to like whatever that is, but you don't feel the sense of it, but there's a weird relationship.
Right.
But then they come together, you hear the musicality, and that's that.
So my younger son has sort of found his calling. He wants to be like a music producer, sound engineer, and he plays on that point where he was telling my older son and I last night, he said, he said, I need a big TV screen because what I do is I'll blow up the waves. So I'll be looking at like a second of music and I need it broke on the TV screen so I can see what's going on in this 1 second. Right. And so he constantly moves, but he moves on both sides of that horizon.
Yes.
He moves into, right. And then he moves back about, now it right. And so he's constantly playing between, and that's what I think is happening in Dialogos. I think we're moving back and forth across that horizon. Yes.
There's a horizontal slowing down, right, of what's happening in the group, and right there's that sense.
Yeah.
Then there's the verticality music, right? That
exactly, and we slow, and the tempo, we slow it down and speed it up. We slow it down and speed it up.
Bingo. This is so great, John. Thank you for this.
Yeah, this has been wonderful.
I
should get going.
Right. Yeah, I need to get going too.
Maybe we want to use this as the video for the live chat. Well, we'll see. We'll talk about it. I think it could really, let's say if Chris can't make it, we could use this as the video that we premiere and do the live chat where we answer questions on. Maybe we could do that.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's run it by Chris and do that. I
Yeah.
also like the idea of actually doing the practice and doing a test
Yeah,
run with some of these
But
things.
we,
right?
like I'm saying, we could do both. Yes, very
Yeah.
much.
Okay.
Okay, that's cool. I gotta go. This has
Thank you,
been
John.
wonderful.
Mwah. Much
Yeah,
love.
actually, yes. If you get a chance, send me this file because I didn't record it on my end.
Okay.
Because I want
I'll
to
send it
listen
to
to
you.
this again. Yeah.
Great.
And we shall have Chris listen to it too.
Yes.
So don't upload it right away because we might want to put like it into the Premiere idea.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
Right on.
Okay.
I'll send it to you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.